Hi, everyone, and welcome to the WP Minute. I'm Eric Karkovac. So today's guest is someone I've wanted to interview for a very long time, Jeffrey Zeldman. You may know him as the co-founder of A List Apart and the Web Standards Project. He's been blogging since 1995. His accomplishments may be too numerous to list here, but it's safe to say that he's made a huge impact on the web. These days, he's an executive creative director at Automatic. Jeffrey, welcome to the WP Minute, and thank you for being on with me today.
Thanks for having me. This is great. Hey, Eric, how are you doing?
I am well. I'm so excited to talk to you because I feel like now obviously you're so well known in the web space, but I feel like we have parallels in our careers a little bit because we both started around the same time. I started playing with HTML in 1995.
Yep.
I know that you were a journalist and copywriter before going to the web. My
Right.
first gig was actually in web design was as a webmaster for my local newspaper, making $5 an hour.
Wow.
Hey, eventually they bumped me up to 6. I didn't stay there that
Wow.
long though. But I want to ask, what drew you to web design back in those days?
Well, at first I hated it, to be honest. My friend, a friend showed me the web, and I was like, this will never catch on. Like AOL is so pretty. And, Apple had a thing, and it was all pictures, and you went into, I forget what it was called. AOL, it was like beautifully designed space, optimized for computers. Um, and I had a client. I was working in advertising. I had a client, Warner Brothers, Don Buckley, their VP of marketing, said he wanted to do a website for Batman Forever. We lied and said, "Oh yeah, we know what that is." And my colleagues and I made a website. We barricaded ourselves in Steve McCarran's office, worked on it for 3 months, launched it. And how we got the account, we had the account as advertisers. Warner Brothers had an in-house team that was already doing online stuff, mainly for AOL, but they were getting ready to do it for the web, and they presented first. They presented their idea first, and they said, "This is the Bat Trove, Trove. Batman swings out on a rope and says, 'Hi, I'm Batman,' and I just went, 'Batman doesn't talk.'" I don't know why I said it. It was very rude. I was interrupting another company's pitch. I wasn't trying to be rude. It was just like an emotional moment or but here's the thing. The client looked me in the eyes like, "Oh, this guy gets it." And I knew at that moment that we were going to win. And we did. We didn't know what we were doing. There was almost nothing you could do on the web, so we invented a bunch of stuff, all of which I would later recant when the web standards movement started, because it was like, it wasn't accessible. It was browser specific. You had to use Netscape 1.1 to see it properly. But I mean, websites, we had just gotten the ability to embed a GIF image. I think JPEG was years away. And I don't know. It was just, once I started doing it, I loved it so much. I got into it by accident because of a client request, but I didn't love advertising the way I came to love web design. And I was okay at advertising. I'd done some halfway decent stuff, but I really struggled. I didn't. I loved the idea because I was sort of mentally childish. I loved the idea of making little films that would make people go, "Oh, great," and then buy
Yeah.
Doritos or whatever. But I didn't love the idea of being an assistant to sales, even though that's what half the websites ended up being anyway. But it just felt so creative. We had to start from scratch, creating an interface in a medium that wasn't really ready for interfaces yet.
Yeah.
You know, uh, We used a whole bunch of weird lo-fi tricks to create an animated bat flying toward the camera when you first got there. And we had videos that were 300 by 200 pixels and took all night to download on a 14.4 modem, and people were downloading them. So it was really fun. I really got into writing the copy for it, uh, setting the tone, and I just loved it. And I quit advertising soon afterwards and just went, well, first I went to, by the time, actually, we'd already started the web standards project, and I worked for 5 months at a .com firm and quit just before the bust because I said, I can do this myself.
Good deal.
We don't need all these people, and I can probably live on it. And that's what I did.
Well, I'm glad you brought up just how much you kind of had to invent on that site, because for those of you watching and listening who maybe weren't around in the early web, there were no standards at that point, right? I mean, we were just making it up as we went along.
There was HTML.
There was
but
HTML.
But that was it.
Yeah, we didn't have
And it wasn't about
JavaScript yet.
visuals.
And
No.
we didn't have CSS yet.
Not for another 2 years. And then usefully not for probably another 10 years.
Exactly. Yeah, the initial CSS was kind of low.
It was awesome, but not predictable because the browsers supported only parts of it and not necessarily correctly.
Exactly. And so how did you start getting involved in web standards? Like what drove you to that decision? Say, this isn't working. We're building stuff that is too proprietary, maybe too buggy.
Netscape 4 and IE4 had come out. IE3 had come out with the first support for CSS, and even though it was limited and not entirely correct per the specification, which, to be fair to Microsoft, when the people made the specification, they didn't have any way of testing it. And they weren't thinking like designers. They were thinking like scientists. So some of the defaults actually didn't make sense, and whether padding got added or not and all that stuff. But so we had these 4 browsers, and people were making 4 versions of their website. You couldn't even say just optimized for IE because which one? Or just optimized for Netscape because which one? The market was about, well, Netscape had dominated, but now it was about 50-50. And people who were doing this work were like, I make so much money by knowing the 4 different ways to make something. And I was on we had a bunch of mailing lists and news groups back then. I'm sure you participated in that too.
Oh, yes.
And I was in one, I don't remember the name of the news group, but George Olson and Glenn Davis were also in that group. Stephen Champion was in that group. And we started talking about how frustrating it was to have 4 different, models, none of which were permanent. And we just, in that newsletter or in that series of mails, which I don't have anymore because I don't have Eudora anymore. I used to download my mail, not leave it in the cloud because there wasn't a cloud. Eudora was awesome. It was a great tool, but it was for System 7. I was still using System 7 back then, but anyway, I wish I still had it. I wish it wasn't in a landfill or on a jazz drive somewhere in a storage unit in Sheboygan or wherever this stuff ended up. I wish, because for historical reasons, it would be interesting to see who contributed the different ideas. But
yeah,
I think Glenn, Web Standards Project was one of the names we kicked around for like, let's make a group and just try something. I think Glenn Davis talked about the WASP because it was like, well, WSP could be WASP, and WASPs are small little annoying bugs, but if enough of them are stinging you, you're going to feel it. And that's where we are as developers. We're going up against 2 huge companies. Microsoft and Netscape. They're huge, and we're nothing. What we represent, if we position the message right, we represent hundreds of thousands of developers who are frustrated right now and designers who are frustrated right now. So that gives us power. It's like democracy, you know. It's one senator, but theoretically they represent, you know, many constituents. We're not going to go into whether that is working at the moment or not. We're just going to go with that's how things seem to be then. So we called it WASP, and I sort of took over a lot of the writing, and I designed the website. And I made it orange because I thought wasps were orange. I'm a city boy. I was surprised when I actually made the wasp logo that wasps really don't look like bugs in cartoons. They really look more like butterflies,
Yeah.
right? With like, but anyway, we did another thing that was effective, which is in advertising, there used to be a thing called a roadblock, Eric. And a roadblock was where, well, in America, there were three networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC. You'd buy a commercial on all three networks, and you'd tell them, I want this to run in the first commercial break of the 6 o'clock news, let's say. There were three news networks. Everybody watched one of them. And in advertising, if your commercial was, you know, playing on CBS and you're like, I don't want to see a commercial, you'd switch to NBC, same commercial. You'd switch to ABC, same commercial. So you'd see the message. It's kind of a gross thing. It can't be done anymore because we no longer have not a duopoly, but a triopoly, I guess. We no longer have three big networks that everybody watches. So, but we used that idea. I had started a list apart with a colleague from that newsletter. Jeff Bean was working at Hotwired. Glenn Davis was running Cool Site of the Day, or maybe it was Project Cool back then. He might have already left Cool Site of the Day. Anyway, he was running either that first site that said, hey, there's cool stuff to look at on the web. Here's a site we like today. Or his second one, which he might have started to get out of I think he started the first one as an employee, and they were like trying to take editorial control away from him, or they weren't. He realized that there was more that he could do if he did it independently, so he did. Anyway, and Steve Champion's Web Design L mailing list had like 2,000 developers on it, but they were like the smartest developers on the web at that time. Anyway, we had a bunch of us who were in this informal group. We all published our announcement on the same day, our demand that, you know, we said standards exist for a reason. It is folly to keep bowdlerizing the web. I can't think of the word. Alec Pollock was my partner. Alec, I'm very sorry. I'm an old man and I forgot your name for a second. I'm really sorry. Alec Pollock and Steve McCarran were the huge collaborators on the Batman site, the Batman Forever site, and they were the two art directors. I mostly concerned myself with content and HTML. But yeah, so we announced it, and nobody could miss it. Jeff Bean wrote his thing, Steve wrote his, and each of us wrote a passionate plea why this mattered to us. And we got a lot of designers to join. The amazing thing was that after about a year, Microsoft and Netscape came around. Their engineers started saying, yeah, we want to work with you. Yes, we want to support these standards. It's in our interest too. They were initially competing. Like, if you remember, Photoshop had competitors before Adobe owned everything in that space.
Yes.
And software designers would differentiate their products, right? In order to make them marketable, kind of like only the Cadillac gives you power steering, or, you know, only the Lexus has I'm not a car guy. I haven't owned a car in like 30 years. So if you can imagine, I live in New York where
Well, that might
you,
be a
you
little
can't keep a
hard.
car. Yeah, no.
But
If you want,
browsers
if
were
you
like
want a
that,
car,
though,
sure.
right?
Yeah. Mm.
I mean, IE was very proprietary with a lot of the
Yeah.
things that they had at that time. I still remember inheriting a client site that was built specifically for IE, and when you looked at it in Netscape, it was terrible. None of the effects
Right.
worked, and they were like
Right.
beside themselves as to why that was happening. And I had to
Yeah.
explain Microsoft, has this certain stand thing that they do
And
that's
Netscape did too.
yeah, yeah.
They introduced JavaScript, uh, which wasn't standardized for, Microsoft had JScript. They were similar, but worked differently. Finally, ECMA, ECMA, Engineering Consortium of Mid-America. I have no idea. I'm blanking on that too, but ECMA, a standards body like the W3C, but older, um, standardized JavaScript, which for a while, because we were pushing on standards so hard, we'd call it ECMAScript. Glenn Davis called it throat clearing script because ECMA script, I guess, is what he was thinking. But anyway, yeah, and we would have arguments with friends. Like I would have a friend says, "Do you know how much money I make by knowing the 4 ways to make this website?" And I said, "Yeah, but if the client's willing to pay that, they're probably equally willing to pay the same amount. But you make one version of the site, and now you have money for photography, for copy editing, for proofreading. You have illustration, maybe. Like there's so many things you can do with that money besides make 4 versions of the same boring website." Flash was already coming out, had just come out too, so that was another sort of stream in this chaos of how things were netting out because people would say, "I just use Flash." And Flash was amazing in its capabilities, but it wasn't accessible by default. And I came in, I think I started out of laziness. I'm not going to memorize these 4 different ways to make a paragraph space
Yeah.
correctly. I want to have one way. I was thrilled by CSS when I saw it in 1996. Microsoft made this gallery. And even though it wasn't great CSS and it wasn't accurate necessarily, it was still amazing. I knew because when people take all night to download a 300 by 200 pixel video, they don't have a lot of speed. So I knew that it was really important to to respect bandwidth, and CSS did that. CSS, you could fill the page with green and then have giant red letters, and you could create a double impression of the letters so that they had a faint, blue background behind the red letters or what. Terrible. You're probably picturing something really ugly.
Something like I would have made in the 90s, exactly.
And I made too. And I made in the 90s too. But also, a really good designer could do amazing things with CSS. And I set about becoming a good designer, which was, so like the education. And if you started as a webmaster, you probably, the same thing. Like you knew some basic things about the code. Now let's find out about lettering. Let's find out, how to lay out a page. Again, very limited at the time because CSS wasn't a page layout.
Yeah.
It was, I want my headline level 1 to be this big and my headline level 2 to be that big.
And my link colors. That was a big thing back in the day, I remember.
David Siegel hated the blue underlined link choice and said red would be better because your eye responds to red and you know to click there. I mean, these are the kind of weird conversations we had back then, like as if links could only be one color. But CSS meant the links could be any color. And you could actually start to use what designers have known about for centuries. You could, use color relationships and size relationships to communicate the meaning of the document, so that people could tell this paragraph goes with this subhead because it's closer to it and there's more space under the last paragraph there before the next subhead. You could start to do what type designers I'm sorry, not what typographers and art directors have done again for centuries, and create a layout that showed you how it worked, so you didn't have to read instructions. Because I don't know about you, but didn't your first websites have like you utilize the navigation bar, click on the navigation bar to find a topic, or
Oh yeah.
we stopped so we were stopping having to do that. It evolved quickly, nowhere near as quickly as AI now, but the slowness of the web standards movement was good because we broke fewer things and we had time to experiment with each thing and go, okay, now we have this capability. What does it mean? And we would discover all the bugs that the browser makers didn't know about. Like if I italicize this word in IE for Windows, it pushes through the border of the containing block, and now the layout's broken. It's broken because I italicized something. I can bold it, but I didn't want it bold. I wanted it italic. What can I do? It was just like, well, you could talk to the browser maker. So it started, I think one of the things our movement was successful in, besides getting standards into browsers, was it started what now goes on, what should have always been going on, which is that designers and developers work with standards bodies to experiment, to say, here's what I can't do. Why is it impossible to do a masonry layout? Like, like, or why do I need JavaScript to control how things lay down on a page? That's silly. So I'm proud of what we achieved. And it was all of us. It wasn't me. It was all of us, everyone in that group. You can go to webstandards.org. It's still up. And you view the history of who contributed what. And after a few years, Glenn and George left early. And I was like, well, somebody's got to keep this going. And it felt like me. I felt like it was like driving by and you see a car crash and there's no ambulance. So you park your car, get out, and try to help the person until an ambulance arrives. It was like that. I was like, I'm not the most qualified person to talk about web standards. I barely know what I'm doing, which was a benefit because that meant I had to figure it out so I really understood it and explain it in the simplest language possible. And because of my advertising background, I know you don't sell features, you sell benefits. Nobody cares about features, but make one version of your site and it works everywhere was a huge promise. Even blind people can use it if you do this was a huge promise. When people said, I sell televisions, I don't have blind users, would be like, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Blind people buy things for their family. Blind people use the web all the time, just like
Absolutely.
everybody else. Yeah, you do. And there's blindness, and then there's all kinds of low vision. Again, we started out with really basic, crude ideas of what we were achieving, and gradually we learned more and more, and we empowered the W3C. In fact, I haven't met Tim Berners-Lee, but I met Hokum Lee several times, the co-creator of CSS. And he told me, we love what you're doing. We depend on contributions from our members to exist. So if we say, Microsoft, do this or screw off, that's not going to be helpful. But if you
Yeah.
do it and you say you represent 200,000 developers who have signed a petition, that's their customer base. That's one of their customer bases. They have to work with agencies and developers that make stuff for the end users and for the companies that depend on their software. So, yeah, we were able to, and once I took over, I was able to make the tone gentler and talk like we're colleagues and I respect what you do and I could never do what you do. I'm talking to people like Tantric Chelik, friend of mine, lives in San Francisco, brilliant guy. He made IE5 for Mac. He made the I forget the name of the rendering engine, but it was the first engine to really seriously try to support a great deal of CSS accurately. I was talking to these much more brilliant people than me. Just I would listen to their brilliant conversations that were sort of abstract, theoretical, academic, to some degree, or just expressed in the language of academics. And I would go, they're trying to make it so this will work for everyone. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
I just basically translated the thoughts of smarter people than me into benefit oriented copy that you could present to your boss when he said, we don't have time for that, or we don't have time for accessibility. So a lot of it was persuasion. And then, of course, once the standards were in the browsers, the last thing that we set out to do was make designers want to use them, help designers realize Flash wasn't necessarily going to stay around forever. Flash could be made accessible with a great deal of work because Adobe cared about that, or Macromedia cared about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm, and then I quit so, younger people could take over and new people could take over, sort of handed it over to, I'm just going to be hitting my desk like a sad old man who can't remember people's names. Molly Holschlag and Aaron Gustafson took over one after the other took over it became more of an educational project. Like
Okay.
you, you know, we've convinced designers to do this. Now, how do they do it? And, Molly had like 50 books on that she'd written on HTML, and she was brilliant. And I think underappreciated. I hope that if there's ever a history of this thing, it will, record the many, and everyone I've mentioned so far is like, I don't know, I feel like because I was the voice of it for a while, and because I wrote the book Designing with Web Standards, people think that I somehow came up with this stuff myself. I didn't. I was working with many much smarter people and basically just almost translating or being an account executive,
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Well, that's the beauty of
Because
the
I'd
web,
see,
right? It's collaborative.
yeah,
And
it's
that's what I love
collaborative.
about this industry even today is that we share knowledge, and I know I learned a lot from a list apart. And I think was that kind of the next step for you then, to just kind of bring in the educational component, because there were so many great articles in there that showed you exactly how to do something that was standards compliant. Because let's face it, the educational system wasn't really there in those days for web designers. We all learned on our
Not at
own.
all. Right. Absolutely. I think so. It came out of the newsletter tradition of sharing knowledge. The first thing I loved about the web, besides I could publish and nobody could stop me, and if I did it right, people would actually come and read or come and look or download these little background patterns I made or something. I could make entertainments. It appealed to the part of me that's an artist, the part of me that's a writer, the part of me that appreciates code, and back then you didn't have to be great at any of those things. You just had to be willing to put in the work. I loved that. And I came out of advertising where you could get fired if you went out for a beer with your friend who worked at another agency and they said, "Hey, I'm pitching Pepsi," and you went, "Hey, we're pitching Pepsi too," you'd both be fired.
Yeah.
You could never share any information. And in the newsletters of the early web design community, people were sharing, here's how I use JavaScript to do X. CSS, Eric Meyer made was another super important member
Oh,
of the Web
absolutely.
Standards Project, made the ACID test for CSS. Even before there were browsers supporting CSS, he was making, today it would be an app, but he was making websites that would test how compliant a browser was. And the immensity of that, it was like the open source movement. We didn't call web standards open source, but it was the same in that we were doing a bunch of work for free. We were making tests and we were writing articles, and that still continues. And I just published a new article in a list part today, but publication has slowed way down there for many reasons. But Smashing Magazine publishes all the time. CSS Discuss. It's funny. There's a CSS site that everybody uses now there was a period where I felt at a list apart, we've said enough about web standards now for a while. Everybody's on board. Let's talk about usability. Let's write about user experience. How do we improve that? Let's talk about copywriting for the web. Let's talk, all that. Let's talk about how do we sell this to our clients? How do we sell this to our internally? How do we do product design on the web? So I started branching out. I said, I don't want to be CSS trick of the week. That was it. I said, I don't want to be CSS trick of the week anymore because for a while it was, Dan Cedar-Holmes, make a background that was last to the bottom of the screen, even though that was impossible in CSS at the
Oh,
moment.
yeah, yeah.
Douglas Bowman was like, give curved edges to a box, even though CSS couldn't do that at the time. Right? Like here's
All the hacks.
all the hacks. Using sprites for image animation,
My gosh, yeah.
which was Dave. Dave, who did the CSS Garden. I apologize, Dave. I'm an old man. I forget people's last names. I know who you are. I see your face before me. 20 minutes from now, I'll blurt out your last name. I'm sorry, Dave.
Well, if you remember,
everybody
go
knows.
ahead.
The CSSN Garden.
I remember that, yeah.
Okay. Do you remember Dave, the guy who wrote it, created it?
I remember visiting that site and just playing around with it, but I do not remember Dave himself.
Of all these things, that thing was huge.
It
People
was.
people who weren't persuaded by the Web Standards Project saw that and went, "Oh, I get it. I don't have to recode all my content if I redesign the layout of this website. If my client changes brand colors, I mean that stuff's obvious, but if they say we want a nature theme for this issue, I can do that." Like just the power of that, even simple CSS was pretty amazing. So
we'll have to link to that in the show notes. And for those that haven't ever visited that, it was basically you could click a link and completely change the style sheet for that site, and it would have a completely different layout and look, color scheme, fonts, all that stuff. It was like at that time, early 2000s, I guess.
Early 2000s.
It was like a light bulb went off for a lot of people at that time.
And I found freelance collaborators too. Like Mike Pick made this thing where everything was, he illustrated the ground that you could walk on, and beneath it were like skeletons of decaying dead animals and stuff. And that was that's what he did with the page. He made a picture out of, and like I worked with, he ended up redesigning a list apart several years ago. But just, the creativity. It doesn't have to be boxes and arrows. It doesn't have to be columns. That's often very useful. It's great for a lot of things, great for newspapers, great for blog posts, but you don't have to, like CSS can pretty much do anything now. And of course, it was very heavy, CSS back then, if you wanted to do, because you had to attach so many images, and have images off screen that would suddenly glide in, but you couldn't control the speed at which things loaded. So it might take 2 minutes for your page to show up for somebody with a slow access before they could see the view. Now we have control over all those things. Like I'm going to preload. When the user goes to the home page, I'm going to preload the top 3 articles on the home page in the background so that if they click through, it'll just happen. Like we figured all that stuff out. We had 20 or 30 years to figure all that stuff out.
Yeah,
and of course now go ahead.
I was going to say the web would not be where it is today. I mean, just the ability to do all these things all in a browser without plugins. We don't need to download Flash. Right. We don't need to bring anything special. Just bring your browser, no matter which one you're using.
No matter which one you're using.
That's
or
a
if
big
you're
deal.
not using, or bring links and it'll still work. And you'll still be able to navigate. Like those things were really important. We still struggle. Accessibility is still an afterthought for so many businesses, which is tragic and foolish. But I got tired of doing that fighting, right? But we still have to do that fighting in a nice way.
Yeah,
with
I see it in my business every day. It's something that you have to educate on.
What do you do now?
Well,
besides this?
Well, I am a
podcast?
freelance developer. I've been doing this for, 30 years now. This is
30
my
years.
27th year on my own. I've worked at home for 27 years, so I don't want to leave the house, uh,
I
but
know the feeling.
but yeah, I mean, so I still run into it. What the whys of accessibility? Well, this is our color. We can't change our color. Well, if you want it as a background, you probably should, because otherwise people can't read it and you might get sued.
Right. That
But
still happens.
this concludes part 1 of my conversation with Jeffrey Zeldman. Be sure to check out our next episode when Jeffrey talks about his role at Automatic and his thoughts on the future of the open web. In the meantime, visit us at thewpminute.com/subscribe to receive our newsletter and support the work we do at the WP Minute. Thanks, and we'll see you again next time.